When I think of games that are undeniably underrated, the Neverhood springs to mind almost immediately. Also known by its full name, The Neverhood Chronicles, or in Japan on the PlayStation as Clayman Clayman, The Neverhood was unfortunately released in 1996 by DreamWorks Interactive, distributed by Microsoft, and developed by The Neverhood Incorporated. I say unfortunately because the mid to late 90s was kind of a bad time to be releasing point-and-click graphical adventure games like this, with technically impressive real-time 3D games getting all the attention. But the Neverhood is technically impressive in its own right, just not for textured polygon pushing that was all the rage back then. The idea for the game came in 1988, when animator Doug Tenable created a world of about 17 structures made out of plasticine clay. The idea sat for a while, but in the meantime he worked on several other video games, most notably Shiny Entertainment's Earthworm Jim, who he designed and animated. Then in 1995, he left with several other Shiny employees to start a new game studio, the Neverhood Inc. They started fleshing out Doug's idea of a claymation game and pitched the idea to DreamWorks Interactive, Steven Spielberg's recently formed software company. DreamWorks thought the idea was fresh and innovative, and presumably a bit weird, and okayed the deal, allowing production to start on the Neverhood game. Over the course of about a year, the team worked tirelessly on it, building huge wooden sets for the Neverhood's world, and applying almost 3 tons of clay to the models to give the game its signature look. All of the action seen in the game was painstakingly done with stop-motion animation of clay figures at 15 frames per second. This really helped the game form an identity of its own, even though the core gameplay was pretty much the same as most any other adventure game out there. This is an OEM version of the game I found for $1 at a local thrift store, and holy crap was I lucky. I've always wanted a copy of the game after seeing a demo of it in Games Sampler 2 for Windows 95, but the Neverhood only sold about 42,000 copies during its lifetime. And it's a cult classic, so the collector's market inflates the game to quite the high price on eBay and the like. It's not unusual at all for the loose copy of the game to go for about $50, and a mint boxed copy for well over $100. So yeah, the game pretty much just came with a manual and CD in the box as far as I know. The full-color manual only has a few pages dedicated to gameplay information because honestly, if you need any more, then you probably should not be near a computer. It's really that simple. The rest is filled with the story of how the Neverhood was made, which is awesome as balls because I say so. While the game CD is chock full of content, the installer only drops about 5 megabytes of data on your hard drive, and the rest is streamed from the CD. This means your CD drive will sound like a cement saw while you're playing the game, whether you like it or not. Thankfully, it seems to work rather well on newer systems, or at least it does if I run it in 256 color mode on my Windows 7 64-bit machine. It starts off with a short claymation intro, basically showing the game name in whimsically animated bliss. Once it's done showing off, you are dropped directly into the game with no explanation or help at all. Your main protagonist, Clayman, is napping on the floor of this empty room, and you can wake him at any time by clicking on him with the mouse. And really, that's all the tutorial you need for the Neverhood. Everything is controlled with the mouse and the left mouse button, so it's really as simple as looking at the room or the scene you're in and finding out what to do. For instance, the goal in this room is to not be in it anymore. So you pull this lever 3 times to have the hammer of ridiculous proportions smash the door down. You'll leave the room and enter the next one, which is a bit more complicated but still a very straightforward puzzle. Just pull on the strings to see which one opens the door, then move this chompy teeth guy underneath the string so it'll clamp down on it to hold the door open. And pretty much the entire game revolves around solving puzzles of some form or another, although they do get predictably more complex and obtuse as the game progresses. There are rarely any hints, so you'll just figure things out by deduction, trial, and error. Although there is this mailbox on a creepy platform that contains some hints in the form of letters, but they're mostly just there to crack wise. Once you leave this first building, the music stops, and you're greeted with the surreal ambiance and bizarre world of the Neverhood. And yes, you're in a first-person perspective in these sections, which control a bit like the Myst games. Just point where you want to go, the camera will move forward a set amount and then choose again, until you reach whatever location you desire. You'd think this would be a bit clunky, and I guess it kind of is, but thankfully the use of the mouse cursor changing shape to show you where you can go makes this intuitive enough. You are free to roam about wherever you want, but naturally you'll need to solve puzzles, gather items, and interact with the environment in order to get very far. It really is a pretty bog-standard point-and-click adventure game at its base level, which means it's a mostly linear experience, and repeated playthroughs probably aren't going to be the most appealing thing ever. The gameplay is also simplified compared to other adventure games, which can be a good or a bad thing depending on how rough you like it. One thing that really simplifies things is the fact that there is no inventory screen. If you come across an object, Clayman will just pick it up and insert it into the conveniently placed hole in his chest. Of course, this also means that solving puzzles that need these objects is as simple as clicking on it, at least initially. There's also no way to get yourself killed in the game, so the threat of failure isn't really there. Well, there is one place you can die that I know of, and it blatantly tells you this, an irresistible temptation to us curious gamers. However, it's at this point in the game that the whole thing starts to get a little bit cumbersome. Several of the puzzles fall into the mindless category, where you're just moving around a lot, spending time doing basically nothing while the level itself trolls you. And like so often in these games, the puzzles eventually go from just slightly challenging to absurd and abstract, and it really breaks the flow to have to resort to a walkthrough online. In fact, it would be awesome to have the Neverhood Inside Moves strategy guide handy, but I think that's about as rare as the game itself. Maybe you are an adventure gaming god and laugh at people like me who need hints, but even so, the game really does grind it to a halt every so often, and it sucks because everything else is just so awesome. For one thing, the music in the game is just fantastic. Terry Scott Taylor did an excellent job creating the surreal soundtrack that permeates the game's various locations, which covers a variety of genres and perhaps even comes up with some new ones. Blending in nicely with the bizarre soundtrack is the game's bizarre sense of humor. While a good portion of it stems from simple slapstick, there is an air of absurdity all throughout the game, and it fits the mood of the game perfectly. A lot of this is really subtle and surreal, and may not be always picked up on by everyone. But then you've got gags like this, which will pretty much make anyone crack up. Another masterful addition is the inclusion of full motion video cutscenes, which provide an enjoyable segue between locations and make great use of classic animated cartoon violence. While it may not seem like it, there is in fact a story to the Neverhood, which is largely told by collecting discs and playing them through disc players. On these, you'll listen to Willie Trombone tell the tale, which is inspired by the biblical story of creation and man's fall from grace.
All that are left of the true story. True story of the closing of the Third Age.
Unfortunately, the cutscenes themselves aren't of the best visual quality, which is just a big freaking shame. The rest of the game is held up rather well, even though it runs at 640 by 480 resolution, but the compression used on the FMV sequences is just crap. I'd love to see this re-released with better quality, because playing the game on a large modern display makes me feel like I'm watching a QuickTime movie through dial-up. However, these are all small setbacks as far as I'm concerned. To me, the Neverhood is an absolute classic, even despite the puzzles which get a bit too out there later on. It's not a terribly long game either, at only a couple hours or so if you just slog through it, but it's an absolute treat for those that like something a little bit different. It's full of style, surreal humor, great character and set-piece design, out-of-the-box puzzles, and a real sense of being on another plane of existence altogether. Plus, it's freaking claymation, and freaking claymation is freaking rad. I do wish there were a proper sequel to the game, and yeah, on the PS1 you've got Skull Monkeys and to a lesser degree, Boom Bots. But they're totally different genres altogether, so the Neverhood manages to stay totally unique. Playing it just sucks me in and provides a mindset like essentially no other adventure game does. Yes, it has a few flaws, and is stupidly hard to find a copy of nowadays, but I'd still recommend the game without any hesitation at all. The Neverhood is never-endingly awesome.